The Forgotten Daughters of Eden. In the grand tapestry of religious texts that have shaped our understanding of human origins, there exists a curious silence. A silence that echoes through millennia, overlooked by scholars, theologians, and believers alike. When you think of Adam and Eve's descendants, which names come to mind? Cain, Abel, Seth. These sons of the first human couple have been immortalized in countless paintings, sermons, and adaptations. But what of their daughters? What of the women who, alongside their brothers, populated the early world? The book of Genesis 5 verse 4-5 tells us, almost in passing, after Seth was born, Adam lived 800 years and had other sons and daughters. Altogether, Adam lived a total of 930 years, and then he died. A simple statement, yet one that opens a door to an untold story. Adam and Eve had daughters, perhaps many daughters, yet their names remain absent from the canonical texts most people know. This absence poses profound questions. Who were these women? What were their names, their stories, their contributions to the nascent human civilization? Why have they been relegated to mere footnotes in our collective memory? As I delved deeper into ancient texts beyond the canonical Bible, I discovered a hidden world. Fragments of stories preserved in apocryphal works, ancient Jewish traditions, and texts not commonly studied by mainstream religious scholars. What emerged was astonishing. A rich tapestry of forgotten female figures who may have shaped humanity's early course as significantly as their better-known brothers. The history of mankind has traditionally been told through the lens of men, notes religious historian Dr. Sarah Levinson. But when we look closer at ancient texts, we find glimpses of women whose stories have been systematically obscured or diminished, not because they weren't important, but because those recording history often failed to recognize their significance. Consider this. If Adam and Eve were the progenitors of humanity, their daughters would have been essential to human propagation. They would have been the matriarchs of lineages, carriers of culture, perhaps even the first to develop crucial skills that allowed early humans to thrive. Yet their stories remain largely untold. One text in particular, the Book of Jubilees, sometimes called the Little Genesis, preserves names and details about Adam and Eve's daughters that the canonical Genesis omits. This text, while not part of the standard biblical canon recognized by most denominations today, was widely respected in many ancient Jewish communities and was found among the Dead Sea Scrolls, suggesting its historical significance. What draws me, and perhaps you, to these forgotten stories isn't merely academic curiosity. There's something deeply compelling about uncovering lost knowledge, about reconstructing narratives that connect us to our most distant ancestors. In a world where many seek to understand their roots through DNA testing and genealogical research, these ancient stories offer a different kind of connection to our origins. The search for these forgotten daughters speaks to something profound in human psychology, our need to understand where we come from, to connect with our roots, to see ourselves as part of an unbroken chain extending back to the beginning of human memory. The story of Adam and Eve's daughters also addresses a fundamental imbalance in how we understand our spiritual heritage. When half of humanity's story is missing, explains theological researcher Maya Goldstein, we're left with an incomplete picture of our origins, our purpose, and our potential. Recovering these women's stories isn't just about historical accuracy, it's about reclaiming a fuller understanding of what it means to be human. As we embark on this journey together, exploring the lives of these remarkable yet forgotten women, I invite you to approach these stories with both scholarly curiosity and spiritual openness. We'll examine what ancient texts tell us about Avan, also called Kalima, the first daughter who married Cain, Azura, who experienced both great tragedy and new beginnings, and others whose names have barely survived the passage of time. These aren't merely tales of wives of famous men. They're stories of women who, if the ancient texts are to be believed, played crucial roles in establishing human civilization, developing essential skills, navigating complex family dynamics, and preserving spiritual wisdom during humanity's earliest days. What were their lives like? What challenges did they face? What wisdom might they have passed down through generations? And perhaps most intriguingly, why have their stories been so thoroughly eclipsed by those of their brothers? The answers may surprise you, challenge long-held assumptions, and perhaps even transform how you think about humanity's spiritual and cultural heritage. For in recovering these lost stories of Eden's daughters, we might just discover missing pieces of ourselves. Sources of wisdom between history and mystery. To journey into the lost stories of Adam and Eve's daughters requires navigating through layers of texts, traditions, and interpretations that span thousands of years. Unlike historical figures documented in multiple independent sources, these earliest women exist in a liminal space between history and mythology, fact and faith. Yet the texts that mention them offer tantalizing glimpses into what might have been. The Book of Jubilees stands as our primary window into this hidden world. Often called the Little Genesis, due to its parallels with the first book of the Bible, Jubilees presents an expanded narrative of events from creation to Moses. Written in Hebrew between the 2nd and 1st centuries BCE, it divides time into Jubilee periods, hence its name, each consisting of 49 years. What makes Jubilees particularly intriguing is its status. While not canonized in most Jewish or Christian traditions, it was highly regarded by many ancient communities. Fragments of Jubilees were discovered among the Dead Sea Scrolls at Qumran, suggesting it held significant authority for at least some Jewish sects during the Second Temple period. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church still includes it in their biblical canon to this day. Jubilees represents a fascinating moment in religious textual development, explains biblical scholar Dr. Jonathan Mercer. It expands on Genesis in ways that attempt to answer questions many early readers must have asked. Where did Cain find his wife? How did humanity populate the earth from just one family? The daughters of Adam and Eve provide those answers. Yet Jubilees itself presents a mystery. The text claims divine origin, stating that an angel of the presence dictated it to Moses on Mount Sinai during the same 40-day period when he received the Torah. This creates a striking contradiction with mainstream religious chronology. How could Moses have authored a text that shows clear signs of being written centuries after his time? This tension between claimed ancient authority and evident later authorship exemplifies the challenges in working with these sources. We're left to wonder, do these accounts preserve genuinely ancient oral traditions about Adam and Eve's daughters that were passed down for generations? Or are they later inventions created to fill gaps in the Genesis narrative? The Cave of Treasures, another non-canonical text from approximately the 4th century CE, offers additional details about Adam's daughters, sometimes using different names. The conflict of Adam and Eve with Satan, an even later text, provides further elaborations. In some Islamic traditions, similar stories appear with variations. These conflicting accounts create a fascinating palimpsest, layers of interpretations written over each other across centuries. Rather than dismissing these contradictions as evidence of unreliability, we might see them as testament to how important these women were in the religious imagination, each tradition struggling to understand their significance. Modern archaeological discoveries provide intriguing context, if not direct evidence. Excavations at Çatalhöyük in Turkey, one of humanity's earliest known settlements, dating to approximately 7500 BCE, reveal societies where women played crucial roles in early agriculture, textile production, and possibly religious leadership, echoing the skills attributed to Adam's daughters in some texts. Genetic studies offer another perspective. While the scientific concept of mitochondrial Eve, the most recent common matrilineal ancestor of all living humans, refers to a woman who lived approximately 150,000 to 200,000 years ago, far earlier than biblical timelines suggest, the concept itself resonates with ancient intuitions about common maternal ancestry. What's fascinating is how ancient intuitions about human origins sometimes parallel modern scientific understandings, though in different frameworks, notes geneticist Dr. Elena Morales. Both ancient religious texts and modern genetics recognize the importance of maternal lineages in understanding human history. The gaps and contradictions in these sources create a space where mystery flourishes, and perhaps this is partly why these stories continue to fascinate. In the absence of definitive historical certainty, we're invited into a realm where spiritual meaning-making and imaginative reconstruction work together. This uncertainty can be frustrating for those seeking concrete facts, but it also creates a powerful opportunity. As we explore these fragments and contradictions, we're not merely passive recipients of ancient wisdom, we become active participants in the recovery and interpretation of lost knowledge. The daughters of Adam and Eve exist at this compelling intersection of history, mystery, and meaning. Their stories invite us to consider not just what might have happened at the dawn of human existence, but what it means for us today. How understanding these forgotten women might illuminate our own search for meaning, connection, and purpose. As we now turn to the specific stories of these remarkable women, remember that we're engaging with narratives that have shaped human understanding for millennia, even when they've remained in the shadows. In exploring them, we join countless generations before us who have sought to understand our origins and our place in the grand narrative of human existence. Avan, the first daughter after Eve. In the shadows of Eden's fall, as humanity took its first tentative steps into a world now governed by toil and pain, a girl was born to the first human couple. According to the Book of Jubilees, her name was Avan, though in other traditions like the Cave of Treasures she is called Kelima. She would become much more than simply the first daughter of creation. She would become the woman who walked alongside humanity's first murderer, the maternal founder of the first city, and possibly the originator of crafts that would transform human civilization. Imagine the world into which Avan was born. A world where everything was being experienced for the first time. The first sunrise, witnessed by human eyes, the first rainfall, the first harvest. Being among the first humans meant living without precedent, without guidance, except from her parents who were themselves navigating an unfamiliar world after their expulsion from paradise. The psychological reality of being among the first humans is almost impossible for us to comprehend, explains anthropologist Dr. Maya Rodriguez. There would have been no cultural inheritance, no traditions to follow or rebel against. Every solution to life's challenges would have been an innovation. The Book of Jubilees tells us that Avan was born in the third week of the second Jubilee, a dating system difficult to translate precisely into our modern calendar, but placing her birth relatively early in human history according to biblical chronology. As she grew, she would have witnessed the expanding family dynamics of humanity's first household, her brothers Cain and Abel developing their distinct paths, one as a farmer, the other as a shepherd. What was Avan's childhood like? Though the texts are silent on her early years, we can imagine a girl learning directly from Eve, acquiring the knowledge her mother had gained both in Eden and in the harsh world beyond its gates. Perhaps she helped Cain in the fields or Abel with his flocks. Perhaps she developed skills neither of her brothers possessed. The pivotal moment in Avan's life came with what would become one of humanity's defining events, the murder of Abel by Cain. The biblical text in Genesis is famously sparse on details surrounding this first homicide, focusing primarily on the divine judgment that followed. But for Avan, this event would have been catastrophic. In one violent moment, she lost one brother to death and another to exile. And then, the texts tell us something remarkable. Avan followed Cain into his banishment. According to the Book of Jubilees, she became his wife. This represents the first of many profound mysteries surrounding Avan. Why would she choose to bind her life to a man who had murdered their brother? Was it love that compelled her, or duty, or perhaps something more pragmatic, the recognition that humanity's survival required difficult choices? The marriage of Cain and Avan represents the first great ethical complexity in human relationships, notes religious ethicist Dr. Sarah Goldman. It forces us to consider how early humans might have balanced justice with mercy, punishment with rehabilitation. Avan's choice to accompany Cain suggests a profound capacity for forgiveness, or perhaps a pragmatic understanding that holding on to vengeance would fracture humanity beyond repair. The Book of Jubilees describes no ceremony for this first human marriage outside Eden's gates, but we might imagine what such a union might have entailed. Perhaps Adam, despite his grief over Abel and anger toward Cain, blessed the couple before their departure. Perhaps Eve shared private wisdom with her daughter about the complexities of partnership in a broken world. What words passed between mother and daughter in that final embrace before Avan walked into exile with her brother husband? Genesis 4:16 tells us that Cain went out from the Lord's presence and lived in the land of Nod, east of Eden. The name Nod itself suggests wandering or exile. Into this uncertain terrain walked Avan, leaving behind everything familiar to forge a new beginning alongside a man carrying the weight of history's first murder. In the land of Nod, Avan bore Cain a son named Enoch. With this birth, she became not only the first daughter of Adam and Eve, but also the mother of a new lineage, a branch of humanity that would develop distinct from those who remained near Eden. Perhaps most remarkably, Genesis 4:17 tells us that Cain was then building a city, and he named it after his son Enoch. This brief mention contains profound implications. The construction of the first human city, humanity's first permanent settlement beyond simple dwellings, coincided with Avan's motherhood. While the text attributes the city's building to Cain, we must wonder about Avan's role in this monumental development. Early urban settlements required not just construction skills, but social organization, resource management, cultural innovations, explains archaeologist Dr. James Richardson. Women in ancient societies often played crucial roles in developing the technologies and social structures that made settled life possible. The textiles, pottery, and food storage methods that enabled permanent settlements were frequently women's domain. Did Avan develop the first loom, creating textiles that would shelter the growing population of the city of Enoch? Did she establish methods for storing grain that would allow for population growth beyond what hunting and gathering could support? The texts are silent on these specifics, but archaeological evidence from our earliest known cities suggests women's innovations were central to urban development. Through Avan and Cain's son Enoch, a lineage emerged that, according to Genesis, included individuals credited with founding significant aspects of human civilization. Their descendants included Jabal, the father of those who live in tents and raise livestock; Jubal, the father of all who play stringed instruments and pipes; and Tubal-Cain, who forged all kinds of tools out of bronze and iron. This suggests that Avan stood at the beginning of a lineage characterized by innovation and cultural development. From her womb came generations of creators and innovators who shaped human civilization through art, metallurgy, and animal husbandry. Yet this same lineage culminated in Lamech, who boasted of killing a young man for striking him, claiming, "If Cain is avenged 7 times, then Lamech 77 times." Genesis 4:24. The violence that began with Cain seemed to intensify through his descendants, suggesting a troubling pattern. What might Avan have thought, watching her children's children develop both remarkable innovations and disturbing tendencies toward violence? Did she attempt to counter the latter with wisdom gained from witnessing the catastrophic results of her brother's rage? Did she pass down to her daughters and granddaughters cautionary tales about the price of violence? The biblical narrative suggests that while Cain's lineage produced cultural and technological advancement, it ultimately proved unsustainable. When the Great Flood came, according to the Genesis account, only Noah's family, descended not from Cain and Avan but from Seth and Azura, survived to repopulate the earth. This casts Avan's story in a poignant light. The woman who followed the first murderer into exile, who helped establish humanity's first city, who became mother to a lineage of innovators, ultimately saw her descendants' line extinguished. Yet the innovations they pioneered, metalworking, music, animal husbandry, urban living, survived through Noah's family, suggesting that Avan's contributions to human civilization outlived her direct genetic lineage. Avan stands as a complex figure at the dawn of human history, a woman who made difficult choices in unprecedented circumstances, who helped establish the foundations of civilized life while partnered with a man bearing the mark of violence. Her story invites us to consider the complex interplay of love, forgiveness, innovation, and legacy that has characterized women's contributions throughout human history, often hidden in the shadows of more prominently recorded male achievements. In recovering Avan's story from ancient texts, we glimpse not just a forgotten biblical figure, but an archetype of women throughout history. Those who have built civilizations alongside complicated men, whose innovations have shaped human culture in ways rarely attributed to them, whose choices have navigated the difficult terrain between justice and mercy, between remembering the past and creating a sustainable future. From tragedy to renewed hope. While Avan followed Cain into exile, another daughter of Adam and Eve would walk a different path, one marked first by devastating loss, then by remarkable renewal. According to the Book of Jubilees, her name was Azura, and her story represents one of history's first tales of resilience in the face of tragedy. The ancient texts tell us that Azura was born in the 6th week of the 4th Jubilee. As she grew into womanhood, she became the wife of Abel, the shepherd whose offerings found favor with God. We can only imagine the life they might have planned together, tending flocks, building a household, raising children who would learn Abel's gentle ways with animals and Azura's knowledge of plants and healing. But what might have been would never come to pass. The biblical account of Abel's murder is stark in its brevity. Cain attacked his brother Abel and killed him. Genesis 4:8. But for Azura, this moment wasn't merely a pivotal event in religious history. It was the shattering of her world, transforming her into humanity's first widow. The psychological impact of being the first human to experience the violent death of a spouse is almost unfathomable, notes trauma psychologist Dr. Rachel Klein. There would have been no cultural templates for grieving, no established rituals for mourning, no community of fellow widows who could understand her experience. Azura would have had to navigate this unprecedented loss without the benefit of accumulated human wisdom about grief. The Book of Jubilees offers no details about Azura's immediate reaction to Abel's murder. Did she discover his body in the field? Did she hear the news from Adam or Eve? Did she confront Cain before he was banished? The texts are silent on these poignant questions, leaving us to imagine the raw emotions of history's first widow. What fragments of ancient tradition do suggest, however, is something remarkable. Azura may have sensed the growing tension between the brothers before violence erupted. According to a lesser-known passage in some versions of the Book of Jubilees, Azura had attempted to mediate between Cain and Abel as their rivalry intensified. She perceived the darkness growing in Cain's heart, one fragment suggests, and sought to bring peace between the brothers, speaking words of reconciliation when they quarreled over their offerings. If true, this casts Azura's subsequent tragedy in an even more poignant light. She had tried to prevent the very violence that would ultimately claim her husband. In the aftermath of Abel's death and Cain's exile, the remaining family faced not only emotional devastation, but practical challenges. The Bible tells us that Abel had been a keeper of flocks. Who would tend his animals now? Did Azura take up her husband's shepherd's staff, learning to guide the sheep through pastures he had once walked? Did she find solace in continuing the work that had defined his brief life? The text suggests that for some time, Azura lived as a widow in Adam and Eve's household. We might imagine the conversations between mother and daughter during this period. Eve, who had experienced the unimaginable pain of losing a son to murder and another to exile, now comforting her daughter, who had lost a husband. Two women, bound by grief, creating humanity's first language of mourning. The female experience of grief often includes not just emotional processing, but practical caregiving, explains cultural anthropologist Dr. Sophia Chang. Throughout history, women have tended to both the emotional and practical aftermath of tragedy. We might imagine Azura and Eve supporting each other in both dimensions, sharing tears while also ensuring the family's continued survival through their labor. But Azura's story doesn't end with loss. The Book of Jubilees tells us something remarkable. Years after Abel's death, once Seth, Adam and Eve's third-named son, had grown to manhood, Azura became his wife. According to the text, in the 5th week of the 5th Jubilee, in the 4th year of the 6th week, she gave birth to a son and named him Enos. This second chapter of Azura's life raises profound questions. How did she transition from being Abel's widow to Seth's wife? Was this a matter of practical necessity in a world with few women? Was it a choice born of genuine affection? Did Seth, who according to Genesis was born after Abel's death, perhaps offer Azura a connection to the husband she had lost? Some scholars suggest that Seth may have been viewed as a spiritual successor to Abel. Genesis 4:25 tells us that when Seth was born, Eve said, "God has granted me another child in place of Abel, since Cain killed him." If Seth was seen as carrying forward Abel's spiritual legacy, perhaps Azura's union with him represented not just a new beginning, but a continuation of the path she had started with her first husband. The birth of Enos to Azura and Seth marked the beginning of a lineage that would prove crucial to biblical history. Genesis 4:26 tells us that during Enos's lifetime, people began to call on the name of the Lord. This suggests that Azura and Seth's household became a center for spiritual devotion, a place where humanity's relationship with the divine was cultivated in new ways. Unlike the lineage of Cain and Avan, which the biblical narrative suggests was eventually extinguished in the Great Flood, the lineage of Seth and Azura continued through Noah and his family. This means that according to biblical genealogy, every human alive today would trace their ancestry back not to Avan, but to Azura, making her, in a real sense, a mother of all living humanity. Ancient traditions suggest that Azura possessed remarkable knowledge of plants and their medicinal properties. The conflict of Adam and Eve with Satan, a much later text, but one that may preserve earlier oral traditions, mentions that certain daughters of Adam and Eve discovered remedies for all illnesses and the proper uses of plants for healing. While the text doesn't specify Azura by name in this context, the association of women in Adam's line with healing knowledge appears in multiple traditions. The connection between women and plant medicine appears across virtually all ancient cultures, notes ethnobotanist Dr. Maria Hernandez. The earliest written medical texts from Mesopotamia, Egypt, and China all indicate that women were often the primary keepers of knowledge about healing plants. The suggestion that Azura possessed such knowledge aligns with what we know about women's roles in early human societies. If Azura did indeed cultivate knowledge of medicinal plants, this would have made her an especially valuable member of the early human community. In a world without hospitals or pharmaceutical laboratories, the ability to identify plants that could reduce fever, fight infection, ease pain, or assist in childbirth would have been literally life-saving. Did Azura pass this knowledge to her daughters and granddaughters? Did she establish what might have been humanity's first medical tradition? The texts don't say explicitly, but the persistent association of women with healing across ancient cultures suggests that such knowledge was indeed transmitted through female lineages for countless generations. The contrast between the descendants of Azura and those of her sister Avan creates one of history's first great dichotomies. According to Genesis, Cain and Avan's lineage became associated with city building, metallurgy, music, and animal husbandry, but also with escalating violence. Seth and Azura's lineage, meanwhile, became associated with spiritual devotion and, through Noah, ultimately with salvation and renewal. This dichotomy has led some commentators to see the two sisters as representing contrasting archetypal paths. Avan as the mother of material civilization, with its mixed legacy of creativity and destruction. Azura as the mother of spiritual tradition, with its emphasis on right relationship with the divine. While such neat divisions likely oversimplify complex historical realities, they point to the profound influence these first daughters may have had on human cultural development. What might Azura and Avan have thought of each other's choices? Did they maintain contact after Cain's exile? Did Azura forgive her sister for following the man who had killed her husband? Did Avan envy her sister's more stable life with Seth? The texts are silent on these questions, but they invite us to consider the complex emotions that must have existed between these first sisters, navigating unprecedented human experiences. As their separate lineages developed distinct characteristics over generations, we might wonder whether Azura observed the developments in the city of Enoch with concern. Did she recognize both the achievements of her sister's descendants and the troubling patterns of violence among them? Did she consciously cultivate different values in her own children? Values centered on spiritual devotion rather than material development? The Book of Jubilees tells us that when Enos, son of Azura, and Seth grew up, he married his sister Noam, who was also the daughter of Seth and Azura. This pattern of sibling marriage in the earliest generations raises obvious questions for modern readers, but ancient commentators understood it as a necessary phase of human population growth in the absence of other options. After a few generations, according to these traditions, such close intermarriage ceased as the human population expanded. Through Enos and Noam, Azura's lineage continued to Canaan, Mahalalel, Jared, and eventually to Enoch, not to be confused with Cain's son of the same name. This Enoch is described in Genesis as a man who walked faithfully with God. Then he was no more, because God took him away. Genesis 5:24. A mysterious reference that many traditions interpret as Enoch being taken directly to heaven without experiencing death. The spiritual devotion that began with Seth and Azura thus reached extraordinary expression in their great-great-great-grandson Enoch. And through Enoch's son Methuselah, then Lamech, not to be confused with Cain's descendant of the same name, the line eventually reached Noah, the man who would preserve humanity through the flood. If the biblical genealogies are taken at face value, Azura stands as a crucial link in the chain of human survival. A woman whose choices in the aftermath of devastating personal tragedy ultimately contributed to humanity's continuation beyond the great catastrophe described in Genesis 6-9. Azura's journey from tragedy to renewal, from being Abel's widow to becoming Seth's wife and the mother of a lineage that would survive when others perished, offers a powerful narrative of resilience. Her story suggests that even in humanity's earliest days, women demonstrated remarkable capacity to rebuild after devastating loss, to find new purpose in the wake of tragedy, and to shape the cultural and spiritual development of subsequent generations. In recovering Azura's story from ancient texts, we glimpse not just biblical history, but a timeless human pattern. The critical role of women in maintaining both cultural continuity and spiritual values through periods of violence and disruption. Her legacy invites us to consider how women, throughout history, have often been the unsung architects of renewal after catastrophe, creating spaces of healing, preservation, and regeneration when existing structures have failed. Legacy of the Forgotten, Modern Reflections on Ancient Daughters. How many daughters did Adam and Eve have? This seemingly simple question opens a window into one of history's most fascinating possibilities. While the Book of Genesis offers the tantalizingly brief statement that Adam had other sons and daughters, it provides no specific count. The Book of Jubilees and other ancient texts are similarly vague on the exact number. What we do know, according to these ancient sources, is that Adam lived for 930 years. Even allowing for the possibility that human fertility might have declined after the initial generations, this extraordinary lifespan suggests the potential for an astonishing number of offspring. If we approach this question from a purely biological perspective, explains reproductive anthropologist Dr. Elena Vasquez, and assume that Eve's childbearing years extended even a fraction of her lifespan, with normal birth spacing of 2 to 3 years between pregnancies, the mathematical possibilities are staggering. We could be talking about dozens, perhaps even hundreds of children. This raises an extraordinary possibility. Adam and Eve may have been the parents not just of a few named children, but of an entire founding population. Their daughters, not just Avan and Azura, but perhaps scores of others whose names haven't been preserved, would have been the maternal ancestors of distinct lineages, each contributing to human diversity. Some ancient traditions hint at this possibility. The medieval text, The Conflict of Adam and Eve with Satan, describes Adam and Eve having 30 male and 30 female children after the birth of Seth. Other traditions suggest even higher numbers. While these figures can't be historically verified, they point to an ancient intuition that humanity's first parents were extraordinarily fertile. This proliferation of early humans through Adam and Eve's many children offers a fascinating parallel to modern genetic research on human origins. Scientists studying mitochondrial DNA, genetic material passed exclusively through maternal lines, have identified what they call mitochondrial Eve, a woman who lived in Africa approximately 150,000 to 200,000 years ago, and from whom all living humans inherit their mitochondrial DNA. To be clear, this scientific concept differs significantly from the biblical Eve in both timing and context. Mitochondrial Eve wasn't the only woman alive at her time. but rather the only one whose maternal line of descendants survives unbroken to the present. Nevertheless, the concept resonates with the ancient intuition that humanity shares common maternal ancestors. What's fascinating is that both religious traditions and modern genetics recognize the importance of maternal lineages in human history, notes genetic anthropologist Dr. James Franklin. They approach this understanding through entirely different methodologies and frameworks, yet both arrive at the concept of shared maternal ancestry as crucial to understanding who we are. But the true revelation in studying Adam and Eve's daughters isn't merely their potential numerical significance. It's the profound insight their stories offer into how women's contributions have been systematically obscured throughout history. Consider this striking pattern. While the sons of Adam and Eve are named and their stories told in detail, their daughters remain largely anonymous, their lives and contributions compressed into brief mentions or omitted entirely from the canonical texts. This pattern of female invisibility extends throughout ancient literature and into modern times. Historian Dr. Sarah Peterson observes, "The erasure of women from historical narratives isn't accidental. It reflects systematic biases in who gets to tell history and whose stories are deemed important." The daughters of Adam and Eve represent perhaps the earliest example of this pattern, but certainly not the last. This erasure has profound implications. When half of humanity's story goes untold, we lose not just historical accuracy but crucial perspectives on human development. The technological innovations attributed to Cain's line, metallurgy, music, animal husbandry, almost certainly involve contributions from women like Avan. The spiritual traditions associated with Seth's line undoubtedly included women's wisdom and practices, passed down through generations of mothers and daughters. Yet there may be an even more remarkable story hiding in these ancient texts, one that has escaped notice due to the focus on the two primary lineages. Several obscure references in various ancient sources hint at the possibility of a third lineage descended from Adam and Eve, one neither associated with Cain's material innovations nor Seth's spiritual devotion. According to fragments preserved in Armenian and Ethiopian traditions, Adam and Eve had a daughter named Luluwa, or sometimes Aklia, who, unlike her sisters Avan and Azura, chose to journey eastward with a group of siblings, establishing a separate community far from both Cain's city of Enoch and the settlements of Seth's line. This third lineage, if the fragments are to be believed, developed distinct cultural practices, spiritual understandings, and ways of living. Some traditions associate this eastern branch with the development of writing systems, astronomical knowledge, and healing practices that differed from those of their Western relatives. While these traditions cannot be historically verified, they raise the tantalizing possibility that the human family tree was more complex and diverse from its earliest branches than the simplified dual lineage, Cain, Seth, that dominates most interpretations. They suggest that women like Luluwa may have been founders of entire civilizational traditions that have been largely forgotten. This possibility resonates with the psychological hunger many people feel for connection to something larger than themselves, for understanding their place in a complex ancestral tapestry. The search for these forgotten daughters speaks to our deep desire to recover lost knowledge and hidden histories. As cultural psychologist Dr. Maya Rodriguez notes, humans have a profound need to understand their origins. When we discover that parts of our ancestral story have been systematically obscured, particularly the contributions of women, it creates both a sense of loss and an opportunity for rediscovery. Uncovering these lost narratives can be deeply healing at both personal and collective levels. This healing dimension may be one reason why interest in recovering women's spiritual and historical contributions has grown exponentially in recent decades. From scholarly research on women's roles in early Christianity to popular books exploring feminine aspects of the divine, there's a cultural hunger for the missing pieces of our spiritual heritage. The daughters of Adam and Eve offer a powerful entry point into this exploration. Their stories, fragmentary though they may be, invite us to consider how different our understanding of human origins might be if women's experiences and contributions had been centered rather than marginalized in our founding narratives. What might we learn from Avan about balancing innovation with ethical awareness, about rebuilding life after trauma or displacement? What wisdom might Azura offer about resilience in the face of devastating loss, about cultivating spiritual practices that sustain communities through generations? What unknown gifts might the mysterious third lineage of Luluwa have developed that could speak to our contemporary challenges? These questions aren't merely historical curiosities. They connect directly to the psychological dynamics explored in the first section of this journey. The hunger for spiritual enlightenment, the fascination with mystery, the search for meaning through symbols and stories. All these psychological patterns reflect our deep need to recover wholeness by integrating the forgotten feminine aspects of our shared heritage. As we've seen, those who seek spiritual understanding are often drawn to recovered knowledge, to the hidden or overlooked aspects of traditional narratives. The daughters of Adam and Eve represent perhaps the most fundamental example of such overlooked wisdom. Women who stood at the very beginning of human history, whose choices and contributions shaped the world we inherit, yet whose stories have been reduced to footnotes or omitted entirely. By recovering these stories, even in their fragmentary form, we participate in a process of healing cultural amnesia. We recognize that our spiritual and cultural inheritance comes not just through the lineages of sons, but through daughters as well. That women have always been co-creators of human civilization, even when their contributions have gone unrecognized. This recognition isn't merely academic. It has profound implications for how we understand ourselves and our potential. When we recover the stories of women like Avan, who followed a difficult path into exile and helped build humanity's first city, like Azura, who rebuilt her life after devastating loss and fostered spiritual traditions that would endure for generations, or like the mysterious Luluwa, who may have established entirely different cultural traditions, we expand our understanding of what's possible for all humans, regardless of gender. The daughters of Adam and Eve remind us that women have been present and active at every crucial juncture in human development, not as passive witnesses, but as decisive actors whose choices have shaped the course of history. Their recovery from the margins of ancient texts invites us to consider what other female contributions might remain hidden in plain sight throughout our historical narratives. As we conclude this exploration, I invite you to consider what might change in your understanding of human origins, spiritual traditions, or cultural development if women's contributions were fully integrated into these narratives. How might recovering these lost stories enhance your own sense of connection to human history and possibility? The daughters of Eden may be separated from us by countless generations, their stories preserved only in fragments of ancient texts, but their legacy continues through every woman who has innovated, healed, taught, or built community in the face of challenges. In seeking their forgotten wisdom, we recover not just historical knowledge, but essential aspects of our shared human inheritance. Wisdom we may desperately need as we face the uncertainties of our common future. I encourage you to share your thoughts on these forgotten daughters in the comments. Which aspects of their stories resonate most deeply with you? What other overlooked female figures from sacred or historical texts would you like to explore? Your engagement continues this ancient tradition of seeking wisdom through shared stories and questions that matter. As we reflect on these ancient stories of forgotten women, perhaps you recognize echoes of your own journey in theirs. Like Avan, many of us have made difficult choices to follow loved ones into unknown territories, building new lives from scratch. Like Azura, we've experienced profound losses, yet found the strength to begin again, carrying forward wisdom that sustains not just ourselves but generations to come. At this stage in life, with decades of experience behind you, you've likely witnessed how women's contributions, perhaps your own, have often gone unrecognized or undervalued. You've seen how history books, corporate boardrooms, and places of worship have frequently minimized female voices while celebrating male achievements. Yet you also know the quiet power that persists despite this erasure. In your families, communities, and workplaces, you've observed how women's wisdom, resilience, and capacity for both innovation and preservation have been essential foundations upon which civilizations continue to build. The daughters of Adam and Eve remind us that this pattern is ancient, but not inevitable. Their recovered stories invite us to recognize the women in our own lives whose contributions have shaped us, to honor their wisdom, and to ensure their legacies continue through our actions. Whether you are a parent, grandparent, mentor, or friend, you have the power to change this narrative going forward. By acknowledging the forgotten women in your own lineage, by telling their stories, by recognizing female contributions in all spheres of life, you participate in healing an ancient wound, not just for women, but for humanity as a whole. For when half of human wisdom is recovered, we all become more complete. If the forgotten daughters of Adam and Eve have awakened your curiosity or resonated with your own experiences, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. What aspects of their stories spoke to you most deeply? Which other overlooked women from history or sacred texts would you like to explore next? Please consider subscribing to our channel to receive notifications about new videos exploring hidden female figures throughout history and spiritual traditions. If you found value in this exploration, sharing it with friends or family members might spark meaningful conversations about the women in your own ancestral stories. Your support through likes and shares helps these important stories reach wider audiences, ensuring that these forgotten voices continue to be heard. Thank you for joining me on this journey of rediscovery.